The Israeli military says it has launched a ground invasion into southern Lebanon, a claim disputed by Hezbollah, which says it is simply not true. The Hezbollah group also says there have been no direct clashes between their fighters and Israeli forces. Hence, the group is ready for a direct confrontation. The statement comes as the Israeli military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, says the IDF is conducting limited and targeted raids against Hezbollah targets. Mr. Hagari also says IDF special forces have exposed and dismantled over 700 Hezbollah terror assets, including underground tunnels.
The Israel Defense Forces is conducting limited and targeted raids along Israel's northern border against the threat Hezbollah poses to civilians in northern Israel. These localized ground raids will target Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and communities along our border. Hezbollah turned Lebanese villages next to Israeli villages into military bases, all ready for an attack on Israel. Hezbollah had prepared to use those villages as staging grounds for an October 7th style invasion into Israeli homes. Our war is with Hezbollah, not with the people of Lebanon. We do not want to harm Lebanese civilians, and we're taking measures to prevent that. We will not let 7th of October happen again on any one of our borders. We will continue doing whatever necessary so that Israeli families can return to their homes in safety and security. One of the buildings that our troops raided, we found proof of this. This is a map that Hezbollah planned to give its terrorists at the time of a wide-scale invasion into the state of Israel, as part of its Conquer the Galilee plan to carry out an October 7th massacre in Israel's north. As you can see on the map, there is a key marking Israeli communities, IDF posts, access roads, and targets for attack. We found this map on one of the compounds that was supposed to be used by thousands of Hezbollah terrorists on the day they carried out their invasion. Hezbollah planned to launch their October 7th attack from villages across southern Lebanon, where they have been building up their arms capabilities and forces for the last 2 decades. Hezbollah also dug tunnels under homes in these villages close to the border with Israel. For years, Israel has warned the world that Hezbollah is violating international law and United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which prohibits the presence of armed militants and weapons in southern Lebanon. This was a resolution that the international community agreed on, and Lebanon and UNIFIL failed to enforce.
Meanwhile, an eyewitness captured the scenes of devastation in Beirut's Dahiyeh suburb. Overnight, a series of strikes hit Beirut's southern suburbs after the Israeli military warned residents to evacuate areas near buildings it said contained Hezbollah infrastructure south of the capital. The strikes come as Israel says intense fighting erupted with Hezbollah in Lebanon's south. Over the past 24 hours, the Lebanese Health Ministry says at least 95 people have been killed and 172 others wounded in Israeli strikes on Lebanon's southern regions, the eastern Bekaa Valley and in Beirut. While the offensive in Lebanon continues, Yemen's Houthi movement has targeted Israeli military posts in Tel Aviv and Eilat with drones. According to the group's military spokesperson, Yahya Sareh, the drone forces targeted a military target belonging to the Israeli enemy in the occupied Jaffa area using a Jaffa-type drone. He says the drone forces also targeted military targets in the al-Rashra Eilat area with 4 Summit 4-type drones. The Houthi militants repeatedly fired missiles and drones at Israel in what they say is solidarity with Palestinians since the war in Gaza began after Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7. Israeli ally, the United States, has been imploring on Israel and parties of the recent conflict in Lebanon to de-escalate the violence. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, says this remains America's position. She also refused revealing discussions with Israel about the incursion into Lebanon.
We are continuing our discussions on a ceasefire, on de-escalation, which we all want to see. I can't tell you what actions the Lebanese army should take or even predict what actions they will take, but our goal is de-escalation. Again, I am not going to project what could happen or may not happen in the future. We have been clear in our position that we want to see de-escalation. We do not want to see this spread, and we want to find a path to peace so that Palestinians and Israelis have safety, and Lebanese and Israelis living on the northern border find security and safety as well.
As for the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, no one wants a return to the past with Israel fighting southern Lebanon over a long period. Lammy was making the remark in an interview in the United Kingdom. He was also reacting to Israel, saying commando and paratroop units launched raids into Lebanon today as part of a limited ground incursion, while Iran-backed Hezbollah says it fired a barrage of missiles into Israel, including at its spy agency near Tel Aviv. An Israeli security official had said the raids by Israeli troops in southern Lebanon were limited and went only a short distance over the border.
I've just got off the phone with Secretary of State Tony Blinken a few moments ago, and of course we've both seen the reports in the media about a next phase for Israel in Lebanon. We both agreed the position that we had at the UN last week, that the best way forward is an immediate ceasefire and to get back to a political solution, the Amos Hochstein plan that allows Israelis to move back to their homes in northern Israel and Lebanese to move back to their homes in southern Israel. And we both are urging de-escalation at this time. As you know, I have been urging since coming to office in July for British nationals to leave Lebanon, and indeed the previous government from October 2023 was urging UK nationals not to travel to Lebanon. But notwithstanding that, of course, we've sent a rapid response team. 700 troops are in Cyprus. We will do all we can to assist people to get out, and we have secured places on commercial flights that are flying tomorrow so that UK nationals can get out. I urge them to leave because the situation on the ground is fast moving, and of course, whilst we will do everything we can to protect British nationals, and those plans are in place to do so, we cannot anticipate the circumstances and the speed with which we could do that if things escalate in a major way over the coming hours and days. I don't mourn the death of the head of a prescribed terrorist organization, but I do mourn the civilians who have lost their lives in the bloodshed over the last few days. And that is why we came together as a G7 of nations and as a Security Council to urge and call for an immediate ceasefire and 21 days in which we can get to a political solution so that Israelis can move back to their homes in northern Israel, so that Lebanese can move back to their homes in southern Lebanon, so that we could see the implementation of Resolution 1701, and so that both these countries can live side by side in peace.
As for the European Union, Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says it's vital to avoid any further military interventions in Lebanon, as this will dramatically aggravate the situation.
Arms should now be silenced, and the voice of diplomacy should speak and to be heard by all. Hezbollah firing rockets and other projectiles into Israel territory since 8th of October has to stop. The sovereignty of both Israel and Lebanon has to be guaranteed, and any further military intervention would dramatically aggravate the situation, and it has to be avoided.
There's more advice coming from Spain. Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Alvarez says Israel should cease conducting ground raids in southern Lebanon to avoid an escalation of the conflict enveloping the wider region. He says Spain is firmly committed to the application of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. The resolution, he says, contains to this day all the elements necessary to resolve the crisis. He also says there's an evacuation plan ready in the case the conditions deteriorate for all Spaniards living in Lebanon. Since February 2022, Spain has commanded the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, and deployed 650 troops along the southern Lebanese border with Israel. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says the United Nations General Assembly should recommend the use of force in line with the resolution it passed in 1950 if the UN Security Council fails to stop Israel's attacks in Gaza and in Lebanon. NATO member Turkey has announced Israel's devastating attack in Gaza against Palestinian militant group Hamas and condemned its recent attacks in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah. It has halted all trade with Israel and applied to join a genocide case against Israel at the World Court, which Israel rejects. Erdogan said after a cabinet meeting in Ankara, the UN General Assembly should rapidly implement the authority to recommend the use of force as it did in the 1950 Uniting for Peace resolution if the Security Council could not show the necessary will. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has joined in condemning Israel's strike on Lebanon. He expressed his thoughts during an address at the swearing-in of incoming President Claudia Sheinbaum. Lebanese troops pulled back from the border with Israel late Monday as a ground invasion by Israel looked imminent, just days after Israel killed the head of the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah in an escalation of regional tension. In a related development, at least 13 Palestinians were killed in Nusrat camp in Gaza following an Israeli airstrike later Monday. The bodies were taken to Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah today. Some Palestinians said they feared that Israel's shift in focus to Lebanon could prolong the conflict in Gaza, which marks its first anniversary next week. Another strike in a school sheltering displaced Palestinian families in the Tufar neighborhood killed at least 7 people, according to Palestinian medics. The Israeli military said in a statement the airstrike targeted Hamas militants operating from a command center embedded in a compound that had previously served as Al-Shijaya School. I want to bring in lecturer at the Faculty of Law in Prime University, Abuja, Chukwuemeka Eze. He joins us from our studio in Abuja. Mr. Eze, it's great to see you, and a happy Independence Day to you.
Thank you, Nigerians.
Right, so there's been a lot of condemnation for the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, and now Israel says it has begun a ground incursion into Lebanon. Do you think Israel will end up with more or less number of allies or enemies at the end of this conflict?
Certainly, Israel will end up with more enemies than allies. But Israel does not bother about that, because in 1948, remember May 14, 1948, when Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, even Saudi Arabia, whose officers and soldiers operated under the Egyptian command, Iraq, Jordan, they all attacked Israel. At that time, Israel was not even in a position to have so many allies. Israel waged the war, and at the end of the day, it got victorious. So I don't think when the military philosophy of Israel is revolves around the existence, sustainable existence, and not necessarily the number of allies or enemies it makes. Although it values allies, but it has not forgotten what happened in Germany in the Second World War. So Israel has not forgotten that, and that drives the military philosophy of Israel. So once it feels that its existence will be tampered with, Israel moves on, whether it makes more enemies or makes more friends. But nevertheless, it cannot operate as an island. It needs more friends than enemies. And definitely, it has shown in the votes at the United Nations General Assembly that Israel has more enemies than friends, because the number of those that voted in favor of the resolution condemning Israel's war in Gaza were more and more and more than many times before.
Now, Israel's main allies in the West, I'm talking about the United States and the UK, all want a halt to the ground operation that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered through his head of chief of army. He's going on with it. Do you think that these countries will eventually have to put boots on the ground to support Israel's military operation?
I doubt whether they will put boots on the ground unless Iran intervenes in the war. If it is just Lebanon, Hezbollah, and perhaps a few other countries, I don't think United States of America and UK will come face to face in war against a country like, some countries like Jordan, Egypt. No, definitely no. But they can confront Iran, and they have been saying so. So if it is just Lebanon, I don't see any possibility of those countries putting boots on the ground, but definitely Israel will put foot on the ground, and I don't think Israel will be relying upon the intervention of the United States of American soldiers putting feet on the ground before it will take the actions it thinks it can take. It has fought many wars without the United States forces participating directly in the war. Remember the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War of 1973. So neither of them did the United States forces put foot on the ground. So I don't think they will, despite the relationship. But if Iran intervenes, that would be a different ball game. And I think the United States is already taking steps in that regard with the United Kingdom by having forces at the Red Sea and in Cyprus.
Yeah, because Iran is preparing its response on behalf of Hezbollah and Hamas as well. Now, it's difficult to talk about the morality at all in the war because the lines are blurred. Do you think Israel's actions in Gaza and now in Lebanon, as well as attacks on Yemen, justifies some morality for the conflict?
Like you say, your interest said that morality is a different ballgame. It's not part of what is considered in this game. The war game is a more serious issue. It's not a time to have conversation over morality, but actions have their consequences. You remember what happened on October 7 when southern Israel was attacked and more than 1,000 people were killed and more than 200 taken hostage. So basically, that action, as far as Israel was concerned, it was not one to begin to argue over morality. They needed to defend their citizens, and they had done so, but the world is not satisfied the way they had gone about it. South Africa has gone to the International Court of Justice, and expects a situation where it will get the preliminary ruling favors South Africa because under the Genocide Convention of 1948, the ICJ has a duty of which has been provided for in Article 38 of the Statute of the ICJ. It has a duty to ensure that world peace is maintained through its judgments, rulings, and other actions. So Israel is under an obligation not to create that climate or environment that we make genocide possible. Although some writers are arguing that genocide has already occurred, some argue that there's likelihood of genocide, some argue that all the elements that will make genocide possible, they are present in the current war between Israel and Hamas, and which has dovetailed into that of Israel, Hezbollah, now graduating into Israel, Lebanon.
Yeah, and just before we go, I wanted to ask, what you think the leaders around the world could learn from what's going on, because terrorism, banditry, insurgency, they all belong to militants who are in groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. What can leaders learn from the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, what they can do and what they cannot?
I think number one, they should learn the limits of the use of force, because force cannot solve everything. Remember that Anwar Sadat, the former military leader of Egypt, used the surprise element to overwhelm Israel to take back Sinai in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War. He was unable to do so despite the surprise element, and knowing that Israel had taken over Sinai in 1967 during the Six-Day War. When he didn't succeed, he came back in peace to negotiate after the war. He came back to negotiate with Israel. And Sinai was peacefully handed over to Egypt. Till today, Sinai remains part of Egypt. I want our leaders to learn the limits of use of force. That since all matters end at the round table, even the Second World War ended at the table, despite all the pogroms and genocide. This shows that no matter how much the countries of the states fight, they will certainly come to the round table. They should be proactive and allow diplomacy to provide a better context for finding solutions, resolving issues, and bringing an end to human suffering, because one war leads to more wars, and at the end of the day, it increases human suffering, making a mess of the whole purpose of humanity. And this, I pray that world leaders will take serious, and the immediate past meetings they had at the United Nations General Assembly, I thought that more actions would have been taken, but it seems that with what is happening in Lebanon, that the only lesson man learns from history is that man shall never learn from history.
You put it rightly there, because we have wondered about the UN's role in all of this. That will be discussed on another day. Chukwuemeka Eze, thank you so much for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Amarachi.